Running commentary. We are exploring listening to albums, introducing the Hardline according to Terence Trent D'Arby. This album was released in 1987 and was an out-of-the-box smash for Terence Trent D'Arby. The reason for this was it kind of tied in with this yuppie sophistication that existed at that time. The mobile phone, the stock market bonds, all of those kind of excessive things that went with the stock market before the bubble burst in 1987. Terence Trent D'Arby, with his bug-like green eyes and thin braids and gangly long legs and incredible stage presence, really captured the imagination of the British public. Later, the American public in 1988, but in 1987, Terence Trent D'Arby really ruled the roost in England. He was born in Manhattan in 1962 and was essentially an army brat, and just like Billy Joel, had been awarded the boxing Golden Gloves for Florida in 1980. So Terence was certainly not somebody to mess with. If You All Get to Heaven is the first track on the album. Terence's vocals are on display here. The song I'm indifferent to. You know, this song doesn't grab me as an opener. I don't feel like this is the best song to start the album with. If You Let Me Stay, which was the first single, was an exciting top 10. It really came out of nowhere and people were just not expecting this kind of soul R&B presence with this very brassy, uplifting, euphoric sound with this guy that was just like really sang like James Brown and spun around and danced and really got into the mood of the thing. It definitely, really inspired people, and it really is a well-written song and well-produced. Guess who else loved Terence Trent D'Arby? Terence himself. He described his album within the first year of it being released as being about as important as the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So that was not received quite so well. And it was very clear from the outset that Terence's confidence in himself was definitely key in his performing, but his confidence in himself maybe should have stayed in the performing and the songwriting rather than these very grandiose claims of being something quite so big, quite so soon. You have to bear in mind this is a debut album. It may have been okay if he'd said it by the third or fourth album, but to actually say right around the time that you're campaigning of your first album that your first album is the most important thing since the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's is perhaps not something I'd have done. Swagger and arrogance, like I say in the UK, this was, these wet behind the ears kids that have come out of these sort of preppy colleges and, holier than thou and driving around in, Italian sports cars and wearing Italian suits, which for the British people up until that point really was... It had never reached, I think, that level of excess, and the yuppies were really unpopular at this point. They're sort of middle-class, pouncing around wine bars and acting like they were better than everybody. Didn't really go over so well with the average person that was struggling to pay their bills. It's also important to bear in mind that the music set at this time, the set of people that fit into this dynamic, Swing Out Sister, Curiosity Killed the Cat, Johnny Hates Jazz, bands that will never be seen again in history because they fit that sort of sophisticated wine bar pocket, which it was a unique time in England. I don't know that we've ever recreated that very sort of Brave New World kind of feeling of 87. Which, by the way, 87 was one of the worst years that Britain ever had. You have to bear in mind this was the year that we were tormented by that terrible hurricane that happened and took down trees in my school ground. I'm sure you've got your own stories about that hurricane that year that was really devastating for the country. I mean, scary as well. I remember that night when the winds were blowing through. Then there was the Zeebrugge ferry incident where the crew of the ship had left the back doors of the ferry open so that the passenger ferry with cars capsized a mile out to sea and was turned on its side with 187 people dying. Terrible year for disasters. And so it continues with the King's Cross subway fire, where someone had dropped a cigarette on an escalator shaft and the thing had gone up like a tinderbox, and people were trapped hundreds and hundreds of feet underground, and the tubes going through the tubes were fanning the flames in that station so that everyone trapped down in King's Cross. Terrible, terrible year. And then, to cap it all off, the stock market crash of 1987. So this really was an unforgettable year in British history, and Terence Trent D'Arby is definitely among the memories of those. Continuing with the music, Wishing Well is a classic. It's a brilliantly written song. It's brilliantly performed. It's cool, and I think Terence has these things where he goes for these kind of understated musical refrains, like he could have made that sound of he could have made that sound a lot bigger, but he likes to go for these like dinkly donkly kind of musical sounds because the voice is so powerful, I'm thinking. What's the other biggest surprise on this record? I was floored. I was floored, and I know that you will be. Who produced this record? Well, I'll give you a clue. They had a big hit in 1983 with Temptation. Heaven 17, Martin Ware is the producer of this record. I was gobsmacked. But then maybe I shouldn't have been. Tina Turner's Let's Stay Together and that whole Private Dancer campaign had been such a success that Martin was able to very confidently go into the record companies and say, look, I can produce R&B singers. I've worked with Tina Turner. Basically, almost single-handedly resurrected her career. You have to bear in mind Glenn Gregory is also on this record. So the British Electric Foundation are behind the production of this record, and hats off to these guys. I'm so impressed with their work on here. I'm still in shock as we talk now about it. You know, the other thing is I mentioned about the production of black vocals and black talent, Martin Ware here. And if you think about Temptation and who actually sings Temptation, the one who really sings on Temptation is Carol Kenyon, who does the higher and higher, all the screaming background vocals, which really was, that was quite a unique thing. So this ability to deal with the black female voice and the energy of the R&B talent, I think really is to their credit here. I can't say enough about it. I'll never turn my back on you, Father's words. By this point, the production and the energy with which this album's moving forward is kind of like a bit of a riptide. You're in it now. You're not getting out of this. You're not going to turn this record off. Why would you? It's going along so nicely. The production here is great. They know exactly what they're doing. Smart production. The man, Terence Trent D'Arby, has a persuasive, coaxing voice when he's ready, which gives way to this ferocious R&B rasp, whooping and hollering, which Terence Trent D'Arby can do, and when spinning on his heels, in the next moment, really giving you performance. I believe he was 25 years old when this album was a hit, so he definitely knew what he wanted, in terms of being a performer. Dance Little Sister was the third single, and it was such a poor choice for a third single. If you think of If You Let Me Stay, and then if you think of Wishing Well, then you release this. The two predecessors had immensely more character than this song. This song, again, Fine in the Wine Bars, ties into those Ponzi sort of crowd here, but in terms of mainstream, it didn't cross over to pop chart domesticity. Hold on, though. Let's talk statistics. This album was certified 5 times platinum in the UK alone. Worldwide, the album sold 1 million copies within the first 3 days. Slower in the USA, but it eventually peaked together with Wishing Well becoming a hit in 1988. Those are some really impressive figures for a debut artist. It's got a major label behind him. I believe it's Columbia Records that's behind this. 7 More Days, great song. The background vocal style is quite distinct. Do you remember? I remember thinking, those two very effeminate guys in the background, and you were like, what? It was very weird, Terence Trent D'Arby's choices sometimes, or whoever decided to put those two guys on background singers. They look like a couple of flaming queens. There's nothing wrong with that, but you were like, why has he got them on backgrounds? It was just, I guess, not to upstage the performer, which they certainly didn't, but it looked like a couple of old queens that he picked up in some fucking trashy gay bar somewhere. And I'm not saying Terence Trent D'Arby's gay, but these background singers were really weird, and these like very understated musical things that we've talked about. 7 More Days is a passionate storm on this album. Terence Trent D'Arby now goes by the name of Sananda Francesco Maitreya, which I understand to be some kind of nod to Buddhist faith. And I think if anyone could benefit from the Buddhist ideology, it's probably Terence Trent D'Arby. I think he probably realized the error of his ways in some ways. Let's Go Forward Again. It's a really good song. There's a sound of aircraft at the beginning, ties into this jet-setting yuppies with their mobile phones, doing deals, being an asshole. Ties in perfectly. They've got their mobile phones, their smoked glass coffee tables. You've got to imagine this record as a whole. And was even more scintillating when you took a snort of cocaine in the pocket of your Italian tailored suit. Because it's got that sensibility as well. It's kind of like it could definitely be a lot more ethereal if powered by, Diablo Blanco. That's what I'm getting here. This song makes me feel more about someone who's like kind of on a mission. That's what this song makes me think of. Sign Your Name was a Christmas 1987 hit. A big hit, and rightfully so. The Christmas, as we've discussed already, had seen some of the worst UK history in a very long time. And I think that, I know that this was Terence's last big hit in the UK. He scored 3 top 10 records in 87, and this was the last of them. This is an absolutely magical, beautifully sung, well-written, well-produced record. And he really did go out at the top of his game. If you consider that he went, of course there's hits like Delicate with Desiree. There's these other songs, Let Her Down Easy, great song. But I think with the comments about being bigger than the Beatles, he just kind of was over in England. Like 1987 was it. That was really the one and only year. Rain is absolutely essential to the album. It's based on the kids' nursery rhyme of, rain, rain, go away, come back another day, and that's what the song's based on. As Yet Untitled is a beautiful a cappella song from the heart. If this had been the only thing Terence Trent D'Arby had ever recorded, he could go to his grave holding his head high. This song is absolutely an unfettered rendering of a man's soul through voice. It's poignant and it's affecting. I think, it's this wonderful song. I wondered if this had been the last song on the album. The order that the tracks go in here is, I think by this point it's clear that I'm enjoying the record, and I think that it's just this. It's a trip. It's a record where you go on a journey. You really go on this R&B journey. And he's definitely got his feet, and he's very grounded in the performing sensibilities of James Brown is the one that really springs to mind. But, there's definitely this feeling of I read on some comment on YouTube where somebody had said, that he'd outperformed and outsung Michael Jackson, and Michael Jackson's not around at this time. This is post-Thriller. Michael Jackson's been missing in action. We Are the World, doing some charity stuff. But, this was recorded during 1986. And Michael Jackson in 86 was not really present. 87 was preparing the Bad album. So I think that's another thing that's to bear in mind here, is that the opportunity to take that market share that Michael Jackson would normally have had on lockdown was a function of the fact that there was no real R&B to challenge this level of energy and commerciality. So the way the album ends is right before the last track. He says, "Meanwhile, on the other side of the world," and who does he go on to cover? Well, we've just talked about Michael Jackson. He covers Who's Loving You. And they do a really great job here. You feel like you're in a live venue at a gospel brunch. The music is on point. Like, the musicianship is great. He sings his ass off. It's just great. He does a great job. I can't say that it's better than Michael Jackson's version. This is a good song, that little refrain that En Vogue used at the beginning of Hold On. It's a great little R&B refrain. It's just so heartrending. I don't think it really matters who sings it. I think someone who can't sing could sing this song and it would be really affecting. Yeah, he does a sensational job on this cover, and this is the way that the album ends. So what this essentially means is that Terence Trent D'Arby is, rather than being a one-hit wonder, is a one-album wonder. Having said this, let's just revisit what may have inspired him to say the kind of things that he did about how great this first album was. And I'm going to say right off the bat, actually I agree with you. I think the album is really very, very good. Very, very good. And he should have been proud of it. But I don't think anyone wants to hear that something that they hold in legendary status is being challenged by something straight out of the gate. In final mark of the Introducing the Hardline according to Terence Trent D'Arby, 92%. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, recommend it to friends, post comments. Also, if you have an album that you'd like to hear reviewed, we welcome your requests.